Does anyone else feel like fighting bosses in Dark Souls and Souls-like games is kind of comparable to learning a new instrument in a way? You expect the inevitable stomping on your first attempt, but you feel yourself slowly making more and more progress with each run. The Grisha, at the very beginning of the game, kinda gave me more trouble than I care to admit, and when I finally beat it, I got so excited about upgrading that I forgot about the bear traps at the mouth of the cave, and so I stepped right into one, and it actually almost killed me. Yeah, I got excited about killing the Grisha. I'm really not that hard to please, I know. After diving into the universe of Mortal Shell a day before its release, thanks to an early key called Symmetry was able to give me, you guys are amazing by the way, I've currently put about 10 or so hours into the game so far, and I can confidently say I'll be spending a lot of time with this game in the future. Everything about the way this game is built and presented really makes it feel like a genuine Souls-like experience. And most impressively, Mortal Shell accomplishes this without sacrificing its own identity. This is definitely not a complete review, and more of a first look than anything, and hopefully I'll be able to avoid anything too spoilery and reveal just enough to you about the game so that you can easily decide whether or not you think it's for you. Mortal Shell is a Souls-inspired action game where you inhabit the bodies of knights and other warriors that have fallen in combat. You're reminded of this quite a bit, because when an enemy attacks you and puts you close to death, you are knocked out of your shell and are given a chance to retrieve it as a sort of second wind. This only happens once though, and if your health depletes a second time, you die for real and are sent back to your most recent stopping point. You collect currency throughout the game in the form of a substance known as tar, and the main upgrade material you collect are items called glimpses. I'm sure there are lore explanations for why those items are called what they are, but I'm clocking in at less than 10 hours and I'm kind of trying to avoid spoiling anything in the story anyways. But yes, that's what they do. The first shell you take control of has a unique ability called Harden, which allows you to tighten your body into stone to deflect basic attacks. You also have the option of hardening and attacking at the same time, which is extremely useful because it seems like every enemy in the game can be knocked over by a wind gust, let alone a sword. I feel like the combat is a little slower than you'd expect from a Souls-like. Truthfully, I was always a fan of the more frenetic pacing that Bloodborne threw at you, but that's really just personal preference. Honestly, aside from that though, I actually found myself really enjoying how satisfying everything felt. Every attack or dodge or weapon swing feels really tight and deliberate. When you swing your sword and it impacts an enemy, it's more than just damage numbers flickering on the screen. It actually sounds and feels like your weapons are making an impact. They also do something really interesting, which is the implementation of what's called a resolve meter. You can fill it either by attacking enemies or by using certain items, though usually at the expense of something else like health or stamina regen. When a gauge is full, you can parry and repost an enemy attack, and in the process, replenish a bit of your health, which should also sound a little familiar. Slower combat definitely isn't bad, but I've always noticed it does make the game a little harder for me to get into. That said, I also think the medical-grade dopamine rush you get when you parry someone's balls off is more than enough to compensate for it. Like, honestly, they nailed the audio design in this. Like, this parry impact sounds absolutely orgasmic. Like, just listen. You can also string together a series of light and heavy attacks using R1 and R2, or the right bumper and trigger, which I think is kind of a fun addition to a type of game with combat that's usually really straightforward. I'm a little torn between whether or not this little bit of variety is really necessary, because while it certainly is fun to experiment with different attacks and combos and whatnot, it feels like more than a couple of them do the same amount of damage, and just about all of them have the same wind-up times, meaning you can just find the combo that hurts the most and spam it as much as your stamina bar allows. I'm certainly glad they thought about stringing together light and heavy attacks like this, but I don't know. Part of me just thinks the attacks would feel more distinct and purposeful if light and heavy were a little more separate. Don't get me wrong, I do feel a little weird telling a game that already has so much Souls inspiration to just be more like Souls, but in all Souls games, the heavy attack felt really independent and standalone. That charged R2 was its own tool with its own unique utilities. You could stagger enemies, break a guard, cancel an attack. There were things you could do with a charged R2 that you just wouldn't get anywhere else. And after realizing this, I've arrived at a headcanon conclusion that the only reason the combos are even there is because they just wanted to leave in that one animation, where you literally grab the sword by the blade and come down on a bitch with the side of the sword guard. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. That's an attack in the game. That is an attack that you can kill things with. If that's the only reason this combo system exists, then in that case, I say keep it. No complaints. From what I've seen so far, the upgrade system is also pretty straightforward. You can use the glimpses you've been collecting and trade them into Sester Janessa to unlock general upgrades such as lessening ability cooldowns and increased item drops from enemies and whatnot. And a couple stories above where you find her, you'll also find a merchant-type NPC with a cat. And yeah, before anyone asks, yes, you can pet the cat. Yes, you can pet. Oh my god, how did they animate that so well? That's so fucking cute. The final NPC you need to talk to is a giant thing that seems to need your help in tending to its wounds, which forwards the main quest. I've already called this little hut Firelink Shrine by accident like 3 times in my head, and I'm probably gonna do it again too. The merchant NPC sells various items, consumables, and upgrade materials ranging from a full set of tools to a rat on a stick. What I found especially impressive is this might be the first Souls-like game that I think I've ever played that doesn't depend on a refillable health restorative like the Estus Flask. You get just about all of your main items by either finding them or scavenging them from the enemies you kill. The effects of all items are measured with something called Familiarity. Your familiarity with all items start at 0, and you increase your familiarity with each time you use the item, which I think is about as brilliant as it is annoying. I have mixed feelings on this because on the one hand, it's great for world building. It really drives home the fact that you're not human. You're a stranger to a lot of what's going on in the game, and communicating that idea through cryptic items with an unclear purpose is pretty genius world building in a way. On the flip side of that, most of the main items you'll be using so frequently that you'll have reached max familiarity with it in like 20 minutes. Most of the items are kinda self-explanatory anyways. The very first item I picked up was, indeed, a health restorative, just like you'd probably expect it to be. It's basically the life gem from the Souls games. It restores, I think, 30 health over 30 seconds, and when your familiarity with that item reaches max, it actually restores that health over a much shorter duration, which is pretty cool. I also found an item called Tainted Nectar that I thought was kind of hilarious, namely its use of the phrase unfit for consumption written in the description of a consumable item. So, of course, naturally, I bit right into that bitch as soon as I picked it up, and it basically just astral projected me out of my own shell and almost killed me. I'm not sure what I expected this item to do, but fuck did I feel stupid for eating it. Much like the Souls games, a lot of its world building is told to you through text, dialogue, and item descriptions. There's an item called Quenching Acid, for instance, that you can use to permanently increase a particular weapon's damage, and the acid, strangely enough, is a solution that repairs metal instead of corroding it. And even the item description itself doesn't sound too confident on how that works. I think the best definition I ever remember hearing for what a Souls-like is, or how it's defined, is a descriptor of a subgenre of action games that are composed of and or fundamentally rooted in Dark Souls-like elements without ignoring its own identity. Losing your items upon death with one more chance to retrieve them is the one people usually think of first, but a Souls-like isn't all about combat. It's not even the biggest part of it. There are so many other elements that define this very particular vein of action game, and while most people tend to immediately think about the combat, inner workings, and the game's mechanical side, it feels like only a few ever really consider things like the atmosphere, the minimalist storytelling, and all the subtle world building that made the Souls universe so oddly fascinating. With that said, Mortal Shell does what no other Souls-like I've played before it has really managed. It actually depresses the living shit out of me. Part of what made the Souls games so fun and addicting for me was because the universe was able to make itself depressing and brooding and all this shittiness, all while still being fascinating enough to survive and explore. When Mortal Shell drops me into a valley surrounded by thick fog and bears with spike hands, I don't feel discouraged from exploring it, because despite the oppressive mood building and towering monstrosities, something still has me going into it feeling like I have somewhat of a chance, and that I'm not 100% helpless. Now, that doesn't mean you aren't gonna die as hell in this game, and you certainly shouldn't prepare for anything less. Most of the combat and the world building already felt about as familiar as I was expecting, but the game's true merit as the Soulslike never actually set in until I realized every new enemy encounter ended with me just lying dead on the floor. And I can't remember any game outside of Souls that has really given me that unique fear of, oh shit, haven't seen you before. Well, I guess that's the end of the run, and this is certainly one of the only Souls-likes I've played that actually gets really close to replicating that same anxiety, with the exception of maybe Neo? Maybe. This game is... You know, I'm not gonna lie, I was really not expecting this to be as great as it was. It feels like it has all the makings of a genuinely great and well-prepared Souls-like, and it accomplishes all of that without it ever feeling like it's pushing its own uniqueness to the back seat. It's a game that's able to take inspiration from its role models in a way that feels less like a carbon copy and more like a love letter. The combat can seem really stiff at times, but of course I'll always take tight and stiff over loose and flaccid. I'm also like 85% sure this wasn't on purpose, but if the overly stiff animations were intentionally designed to have a slight clunkiness to simulate the rigor mortis of all the long dead warriors you've been inhabiting, then holy shit, that is some brilliant fucking world building. As you know, I don't really like numbered rating systems from 1 to 10. I prefer the binary scale, which is the only truly honest rating system. Should you play it, or shouldn't you? Mortal Shell definitely isn't for everyone, but I mean, hell, I wasn't expecting anything from it, and it'll probably end up being my time sink for the week. I'd at least have to tell you to give it a shot. Thanks for tuning into The Forge, and let me know if you feel like you'd be interested in some more content related to Mortal Shell. Maybe a beginner's guide or something similar to that. I don't know, man, I'm looking for pretty much any excuse to continue playing this game. In the meantime, it's been real, it's been fun, and I'll see you next time. Take it easy.